Welcome to Calming Bedtime Journeys channel. Tonight we step quietly into a medieval blacksmith's workshop on a deep winter evening, where the last light of day fades and something slower begins to take its place. Have you ever wondered what nights felt like in a place built for fire and iron when the world outside turned cold and silent, or what secrets might linger in a room that never truly sleeps even when the work is done? So before you settle into the story, take a second to like the video and hit subscribe, and if you feel like it, let me know where you are in the world right now and what time it is where you're listening from. Now dim the lights. You stand just inside the doorway, the wooden frame cool beneath your fingertips as the final grey tones of dusk settle across the village outside. The air carries a faint bite of winter slipping in through every small crack in the walls, yet it softens as it meets the lingering warmth of the forge. Behind you, the outside world begins to quiet, footsteps fading, distant voices lowering until only the occasional rustle of wind moves through the narrow streets. Inside the workshop feels different, not silent, never sullen, but quieter in a way that feels almost deliberate. The forge glows low now, no longer roaring as it did during the day, but breathing in slow pulses of orange and red. You watch the embers shift, gently collapsing inward, then brightening again as a hidden pocket of heat finds its way to the surface. It feels steady, familiar. A widely accepted understanding of medieval craft life is that blacksmiths often worked from early morning until the last usable light, relying heavily on daylight to guide their hands. Yet the fire itself rarely went out completely, especially in colder seasons, because relighting it from nothing could take time and precious resources. So even now, as the day's labour fades, the forge remains alive in a quieter state. You step further in your boots, brushing lightly against the packed earth floor. The ground feels firm, uneven in places where years of use have shaped it into subtle dips and ridges. A faint layer of ash softens your steps, rising in the air with each movement before settling again. It smells dry, slightly bitter. To your left, the anvil stands in its usual place, its dark surface still holding the memory of heat. You reach out, not quite touching, but close enough to feel the faint warmth radiating upward. The metal seems to hum with the day's work, as if it has not fully let go of what it has shaped. Nearby, a hammer rests where it was last placed, its wooden handle worn smooth by repeated use. The tools are at rest, but they do not feel inactive. A quieter interpretation among some historians suggests that workshops like this were never entirely separate from daily life, especially in smaller communities. The space you stand in may have served not only as a place of labour, but also as a place of gathering, eating, and sometimes even sleeping. You can sense that overlap now in the way objects are arranged without strict division. There is no sharp boundary between work and rest here. You take another step closer to the forge and the warmth becomes more noticeable. It settles against your skin, not intense but steady enough to contrast with the chill that still lingers in your hands. The scent shifts as you move nearer charcoal and iron, blending with something softer, perhaps the remnants of cooked food or heated water. A small wooden bench sits near the wall, its surface marked by scratches and darkened patches. You imagine it used for many purposes, tools laid out during the day, then cleared to make space for something simpler as evening arrives. The light from the forge flickers across it, creating slow, uneven shadows that stretch and retreat with each subtle movement of the fire. You pause there, just watching. Outside, the wind grows slightly stronger, pressing faintly against the structure. You hear it slip along the edges of the building, a low, steady sound that never quite enters, but always makes itself known. It carries with it the distant scent of cold earth and perhaps snow not far away. Inside, the air remains warmer, protected. There is a moment where nothing changes, or at least nothing obvious does, and yet you begin to notice a shift not in the objects around you, but in the pace of everything. The urgency that once defined the space has faded. Movements, if they happen at all, are slower, more considered. Even the fire seems to move differently, now its flames rising with less force, settling more quickly. You draw a slow breath. The air feels thicker, here layered with the residue of heat and work, yet it does not feel heavy. Instead, it feels contained, as if the space itself is holding on to everything that has passed through it during the day. There is a quiet sense of continuity. Nothing is rushed anymore. A lesser-known detail, occasionally noted in historical discussions, is that blacksmiths sometimes developed a deep familiarity with the behavior of their fires, to the point where they could judge temperature and readiness simply by color and sound. You can almost imagine that skill here, even in this quieter moment where the forge continues its subtle, steady activity. You move your gaze back toward the doorway. The outside has grown darker now, the last traces of daylight nearly gone. The village beyond is no longer clearly visible, only suggested by faint outlines and the occasional distant glow from another hearth. The separation between inside and outside feels stronger, more defined. You are aware of the boundary, and of your place within it. The workshop, with its warm core and shadowed edges, feels like a small world of its own. The walls creak softly now and then, adjusting to the drop in temperature. Somewhere above, a beam shifts slightly, releasing a faint, dry sound that blends into the background. Nothing demands your attention. Everything invites it. You let your focus drift back to the forge once more, watching as a small piece of charcoal collapses inward, sending a brief scatter of sparks upward. They rise only a short distance before fading, their glow disappearing almost as soon as it appears. It is a quiet display, easily missed, and yet in this moment it feels complete. You remain there steady, aware of the warmth against your face and the cooler air at your back. The contrast becomes something you settle into, a balance that defines the space around you. The workshop is neither fully active nor fully at rest. It exists in between, and as the night deepens outside, you begin to understand that this in-between state is where much of its life quietly continues. You remain near the forge, your attention settling more deeply into its slow, steady rhythm, as if the fire itself has begun to guide your awareness. The glow is softer now than before, yet it feels more present in a subtle way, no longer competing with daylight, no longer needing to assert itself. It simply exists, constant and patient. The forge breathes. You notice it clearly now. A gentle rise into brightness, followed by a quiet dimming, then a return again. The cycle is not perfectly regular, yet it carries a rhythm that feels almost natural, like something shaped by long familiarity rather than strict control. You find yourself matching it without thinking, your breathing slowing, your body adjusting to the pace of the space around you. A faint sound accompanies it, barely more than a whisper, the soft crackle of charcoal shifting, the occasional light pop as a fragment gives way to heat. These sounds blend together, forming a kind of quiet background presence that never fully disappears. It is not silence, but it feels close to it. You take a small step closer. The warmth deepens. It touches your hands first, then your face spreading gently across your skin. There is a comfort in it, especially as the cold outside continues to press against the structure of the building. You can feel the difference clearly now, the line between the forge's influence and the reach of the winter air. Here near the fire you are held. A commonly recognized aspect of medieval blacksmithing is the importance of maintaining a consistent bed of coals rather than relying on open flames alone. The hottest part of the forge often lies just beneath the surface, where air can feed the embers and intensify their heat. What you see now, this soft glow, is only part of the fire's true strength. Most of its power is hidden. You shift your gaze downward, noticing how the coals cluster together, some glowing brightly, others darker, yet all contributing to the same quiet system. It is not chaotic. It is ordered in its own way, shaped by how the fuel was placed, how the air has moved through it, how it has been tended throughout the day. You begin to understand that this fire has a memory, not in a literal sense, but in how it carries forward the results of every action taken before. Each piece of charcoal, each adjustment, each moment of attention has led to this exact state. It is a continuation, not a beginning. The bellows rest nearby. You glance toward them, noticing the worn leather, the wooden handles polished by repeated use. During the day, they would have been worked steadily, pushing air into the forge, feeding the fire with controlled bursts of energy. Now they sit still, yet their presence is felt. A quiet potential, Some interpretations suggest that blacksmiths often developed a personal rhythm with their tools, especially with the bellows, treating the act of feeding the fire as a kind of learned timing rather than a mechanical process. You can almost imagine that rhythm now, even in stillness, as if the workshop itself remembers it. You listen again. The fire responds, not dramatically, not suddenly, but in small, almost imperceptible ways. A slight increase in brightness here, a soft collapse there. It feels as though it is adjusting to its own internal conditions, maintaining balance without intervention. You lower yourself slowly onto the edge of the wooden bench, feeling the surface firm beneath you. The heat from the forge reaches you here as well, though less directly softened by distance. It is enough to keep the cold from settling too deeply, yet not so strong that it demands your attention. It allows you to rest. Your hands come together loosely in your lap, and you notice how the warmth lingers on your skin. There is a faint dryness to it, the kind that comes from long exposure to heated air. It is not uncomfortable, just present another detail that becomes part of the overall experience. The scent of the forge deepens as you sit. Charcoal iron, a hint of something metallic that seems to rest at the back of your throat. It is a layered smell, not unpleasant but unmistakable. It defines the space as much as the light does. Outside, wind shifts again. You hear it move along the walls, brushing against the wooden planks, slipping through unseen gaps. For a brief moment the cold air presses inward and you feel it touch the edge of your awareness. Then it fades, held back once more by the steady presence of the fire. The balance holds. A curious detail sometimes mentioned in discussions of medieval workshops is that the forge could serve as one of the few reliable sources of warmth during harsh winters, not just for the blacksmith, but occasionally for others nearby. It was not unusual for people to gather briefly in such spaces, drawn by the heat and the sense of shelter. You can imagine that happening here. The space is not large, but it feels capable of holding more than one life at a time. The arrangement of objects, the open area near the forge, the positioning of the bench all suggest a place that adapts as needed. You lean back slightly, allowing your gaze to soften. The fire continues its quiet work. It no longer feels like something you're observing from a distance. Instead, it feels like something you are sharing space with, something that shapes the environment in ways both obvious and subtle. The light it casts moves slowly across the walls, tracing the lines of wood grain, catching on the edges of tools, then slipping away again. Time begins to stretch, not in a way that feels slow or heavy, but in a way that feels unmeasured. There is no clear marker of minutes passing, no strong change to signal progression. Only the gentle, continuous presence of the forge and the steady quiet of the night. You draw another slow breath. The air moves easily, warmed as it passes near the coals, then cooling slightly as it reaches you. It carries with it the same familiar sense, the same quiet sense of continuity. Nothing is new yet, nothing feels stale. It is simply ongoing. Some scholars have questioned how much attention blacksmiths needed to give their fires during periods of rest, suggesting that a well-prepared bed of coals could sustain itself for extended periods with minimal intervention. Others argue that constant awareness was still required even if no active work was being done. You consider this as you watch the forge. It seems capable of continuing on its own at least for a while. Yet there is also a sense that it is being quietly monitored even if no one is actively adjusting it, a kind of shared awareness between person and fire. You remain seated, your body gradually settling into the warmth, your thoughts slowing in response to the steady rhythm around you. The workshop feels less like a place of labour now, and more like a place of presence. The forge glows, the night deepens, and you find yourself drifting gently into the calm space between them. You sit quietly, allowing your awareness to expand beyond the forge itself, and gradually your attention begins to settle on the tools that rest around you. They no longer dominate the space as they once did during the day. Now they feel quieter, almost reflective, as if they too have entered a state of rest after long use. The workshop holds its breath. You notice the anvil again, its dark surface catching faint reflections from the fire. Earlier it would have rung with sharp, rhythmic strikes, each impact echoing outward with a clear, commanding tone. Now it gives off nothing but silence. Even so, you can almost hear the memory of those sounds lingering in the air. A commonly accepted observation in studies of medieval metalwork is that anvils could retain warmth for some time after use, especially when work had been steady throughout the day. You lean slightly forward, extending your hand just close enough to sense a faint trace of that residual heat. It is subtle, yet undeniable. The warmth is fading, but it is not gone. Nearby, a pair of tongs rests across a wooden surface, their jaws slightly open, as if paused mid-task. You imagine the countless times they have gripped heated metal, lifting it from the heart of the forge, holding it steady while it was shaped. Now they lie still, their purpose temporarily complete. The metal looks dull in this light. No glow, no shimmer, just quiet form. A lesser-known detail often mentioned in discussions of traditional workshops is that tools were rarely stored far from where they were last used. Instead, they remained within easy reach, creating a kind of lived-in arrangement that reflected the habits of the person who used them. You can see that pattern here in the way each object seems placed not by design but by repetition. You shift your gaze slowly across the room. A hammer leans against the side of the bench, its head slightly angled, catching a soft line of orange light. The handle shows the marks of long use, small variations in colour where hands have gripped it again and again. It feels personal in a quiet way, shaped as much by the blacksmith as the iron it once struck. The tools tell their own story, even in stillness. You listen closely, and for a moment you think you hear something. A faint ticking sound, irregular and soft. You hold your breath, focusing on it, trying to understand its source. Then you notice it clearly. It comes from the cooling metal itself. The tools are settling. As they lose heat, they contract slightly, producing tiny, almost imperceptible sounds. It is a gentle process, easy to overlook, yet once you notice it, it becomes part of the atmosphere. A quiet reminder that even in rest, things continue to change. You tilt your head slightly, listening again. There it is. A soft tick, then another. A widely recognized principle in metalworking is that temperature changes affect the structure of iron, causing expansion when heated and contraction as it cools. While the process is gradual, the transition can produce these subtle sounds, especially in a space that has recently been active. You find it calming. The workshop speaks in small ways now, not through the force of labour, but through these quiet adjustments. The sounds are spaced out, never overwhelming, always leaving room for stillness in between. You let your hand rest lightly against the edge of the bench, feeling the texture of the wood beneath your fingers. It is rough in places, smoother in others, shaped by years of use. A faint warmth remains here as well, though less noticeable than near the forge. The air shifts gently around you. The scent of iron lingers, mixed with the dry note of ash and the faint trace of smoke that seems to settle into every surface. It is not sharp, not intrusive, but it defines the space in a way that feels consistent. Outside, the wind has quieted slightly. Or perhaps you have simply grown accustomed to it. The boundary between inside and outside feels more stable now, less noticeable as your focus remains within the workshop. The cold is still present, but it no longer demands your attention. The warmth of the forge holds steady, maintaining its quiet influence. You glance toward a cluster of smaller tools laid out near the wall. Files, chisels, perhaps a small punch. Each one has its own purpose, its own role in the shaping of metal. During the day they would have been picked up, set down, used with precision. Now they lie in place, their edges catching only the faintest glimmer of light. They seem almost at ease. Some interpretations suggest that the organisation of tools in a medieval workshop was often more intuitive than systematic, shaped by personal habit rather than strict order. You can sense that here in the way nothing feels out of place, even though nothing is arranged in perfect alignment. It is a functional harmony. You shift slightly on the bench, adjusting your position, and the wood gives a soft creak beneath you. The sound blends into the quiet environment, neither loud nor distracting. It becomes just another layer in the gentle soundscape of the room. You draw a slow breath. The air feels steady. There is a rhythm here, not just in the fire, but in the entire space. The cooling tools, the faint sounds, the lingering warmth all contribute to a sense of continuity that does not rely on movement or activity. You begin to feel it more deeply, a sense of transition, not from one state to another in a sudden way, but a gradual easing, a shift from the intensity of work into something softer. The workshop is not asleep, but it is no longer awake in the same way. It rests, in its own quiet manner. You let your gaze return to the anvil one more time, noticing how its surface now reflects only the faintest glow. The strong light of the day is gone, replaced by something more subdued. It feels almost reflective, as if the object itself has settled into the calm of the evening. You remain there, aware of the space, aware of the small changes still unfolding, and aware of how little is required for this moment to feel complete. Nothing more needs to happen. Everything already has. You remain seated for a while longer, letting the quiet settle fully around you, until gradually your awareness begins to shift again, this time toward the physical presence of the workshop itself. Not just the fire, not just the tools, but the weight of everything that has passed through this space during the day. It lingers. You rise slowly from the bench, your movements unhurried, and take a few careful steps across the floor. The ground feels familiar beneath your boots, firm yet uneven, shaped by years of repeated motion. There is a slight give in certain areas where ash and dust have gathered, softening each step just enough to quiet your movement. You notice how the air feels different here. Closer to the center of the room, it carries a faint warmth, but near the edges, a subtle chill begins to return. It is not sharp, not uncomfortable, but present enough to remind you that winter waits just beyond the walls. The balance between heat and cold is constant, shifting gently with every step you take. You pause near a wooden post that supports the structure. The timber feels solid. There is a faint roughness beneath your fingertips as you rest your hand against it, the grain worn smooth in some places and splintered in others. It holds the quiet memory of countless days absorbing heat smoke and the small vibrations of work that once filled the space. A well-established understanding of medieval workshops is that structures like this were often built from locally available materials, with wood forming the main support and earth serving as the base floor. Over time, these materials would absorb the environment around them, carrying traces of smoke, soot, and daily use deep into their surfaces. You can sense that now, not just in what you see, but in what you feel. The walls seem to hold the warmth differently than the air, releasing it slowly, almost reluctantly, as if they are not quite ready to let it go. When you move your hand away, the surface cools quickly, returning to the quiet stillness of the night. You take a step toward a work table set along the side of the room. Its surface is marked. Scratches, dents, darkened patches where hot metal may have rested for a moment too long. Each mark tells a small story, not individually important, but together forming a pattern of repeated effort. You trace one of the grooves lightly with your finger, following its path across the wood. It feels deliberate, even if it was not. A less commonly discussed detail in craft history is that blacksmiths often worked in environments where precision and imperfection existed side by side. Tools and surfaces were used again and again, accumulating marks rather than being replaced, creating a workspace that reflected experience rather than ideal condition. You begin to understand that idea here. Nothing feels new, yet nothing feels neglected. There is a quiet dignity in the wear. You move closer to the forge again, drawn back by its steady presence, and notice how the ash has gathered around its base. It forms a soft, uneven layer, pale grey against the darker ground beneath. When you step near it, a small cloud lifts briefly, then settles again almost immediately. The air shifts with it, carrying a faint dryness that brushes lightly against your throat. You inhale slowly, noticing how the scent changes depending on where you stand. Near the forge, the smell is richer, deeper, shaped by heat and charcoal. Further away, it becomes lighter, more mixed with the natural scent of wood and earth. It is a layered environment, subtle but distinct. Outside, the night continues to deepen, though you are less aware of it now. The sounds have grown softer, more distant, as if the world beyond the workshop has settled into its own rhythm. Occasionally a faint movement reaches you, a branch shifting, a distant animal passing through the dark, but these moments are brief. Inside remains steady. You glance upward toward the beams overhead. They stretch across the ceiling, darkened by years of smoke, their edges softened by time. A small movement catches your attention as a fine line of dust drifts downward, barely visible in the low light. It settles quietly, unnoticed by anything but you. The space feels lived in, not just used. There is a difference. Some interpretations in historical study suggest that workshops like this, they've often served as extensions of the home, especially in colder seasons when maintaining a separate heated space would be difficult. This blending of work and living space created environments where the boundaries between labour and rest became fluid. You can feel that fluidity now. There is no clear division between where work ends and where life begins. You take another slow step, your hand brushing lightly against the edge of a tool rack. The wood gives a soft sound in response, a quiet acknowledgement of contact. The tools resting there remain still, their shapes outlined faintly in the firelight. Everything feels grounded. Held in place by its own weight, you become more aware of your own body in the space, the way your movements affect the air, the way the floor responds beneath you. There is a heaviness, not uncomfortable, but steady, as if the entire workshop carries a kind of physical memory that you are now part of. You pause again, letting that awareness settle. The forge continues its low glow unchanged, providing a constant point of reference in the room. Around it, everything else exists in quieter layers, each surface, each object contributing to the overall sense of presence. You rest your hand once more against the wooden post. This time you leave it there a moment longer, feeling the temperature, the texture, the quiet strength of it. And as you stand in that stillness, you begin to understand that the workshop is not just a place where work happens. It is a place where time collects, where effort leaves its mark, and where even in the quiet of a winter night nothing ever truly disappears. It remains, in the wood, in the ash, in the air itself. You remain standing near the post for a moment, then gradually your attention shifts again, drawn by a softer presence that begins to reveal itself near the forge. It is not the fire this time, but something quieter, something shaped not by labour but by necessity. A small meal is being prepared. You notice it first through scent, a gentle warmth layered with something earthy, perhaps grain or broth, rising slowly through the air. It is subtle, not rich or complex, but steady enough to become part of the atmosphere. It blends with the charcoal and iron, softening their sharper edges. You step closer. The source becomes clear. A simple pot rests near the coals, positioned carefully, where the heat is strong enough to warm but not so intense that it boils rapidly. The liquid inside moves in slow, quiet ripples, releasing small wisps of steam that drift upward and disappear into the dim air. It is a modest meal, but it feels sufficient. A broadly accepted detail of medieval daily life is that many meals, especially in colder months, were based on simple, durable ingredients such as grains, root vegetables, and occasional bits of preserved meat. These meals were often prepared close to a fire that served multiple purposes, providing both heat and a place to cook. You can imagine that balance here. Nothing is wasted. Everything serves more than one role. You lower yourself carefully onto the bench again, positioning yourself where the warmth reaches you evenly. From here, you can watch the pot, the forge, and the surrounding space all at once. The arrangement feels intentional, even if it was formed through habit rather than design. The scent grows slightly stronger. It carries a faint sweetness now, perhaps from softened grains or vegetables, breaking down slowly in the heat. There is a comfort in it, not indulgent, but reassuring in its simplicity. You draw a slow breath. The warmth of the food blends with the warmth of the fire, creating a softer environment than before. The sharpness of the metal scent fades slightly, replaced by something more rounded, more grounded. You hear a small movement nearby. A hand reaches towards the pot, adjusting its position just slightly, ensuring it remains within the right range of heat. The motion is practiced, careful, requiring little thought. It is done without urgency. Then the hand withdraws. A less frequently highlighted aspect of medieval workshops is how often they doubled as living spaces, particularly for craftsmen who needed constant access to their tools and fire. Preparing food within the same space was not unusual, especially during long winter nights when stepping outside meant facing the cold. You can sense that practicality now. Everything happens here. Together. You watch as a wooden spoon rests beside the pot, its handle worn smooth, its surface darkened by repeated use. It looks simple, almost unremarkable, yet it carries its own quiet history. Each mark on it suggests repetition, familiarity, routine. You reach out and lightly touch the edge of the bench, again grounding yourself in the moment. The wood feels warmer now, the nearby heat spreading outward, settling into the surface. It contrasts gently with the cooler air that still lingers further from the forge. The balance remains, warmth and cold, stillness and quiet activity. Outside, the night deepens further, though it feels distant now. The sounds that once reached you have softened almost completely. Only the faintest hints of movement remain barely noticeable unless you listen for them. Inside, the space feels enclosed, not confined, but a helm. A small detail occasionally mentioned in historical discussions is that evening meals were often lighter and less structured than those earlier in the day, shaped by what remained available and the need to conserve resources. The focus was not on variety, but on sustaining energy and warmth. You can imagine that intention here. The meal is not elaborate. It does not need to be. You watch as the surface of the liquid shifts again, a slow movement that reflects the gentle heat beneath it. The steam rises in thin lines, catching the faint glow of the forge before fading into the darker air above. It feels quiet, complete. You bring your hands closer together, holding them loosely near the warmth, and notice how the heat reaches deeper now, easing the lingering chill from your fingers. The sensation is gradual, steady, requiring no effort on your part. You simply remain. A soft sound breaks the stillness as the spoon is lifted and dipped into the pot. The motion is slow, careful, creating a gentle ripple that spreads outward and fades. There is no rush, no urgency, only the quiet act of tending. Then the spoon is set down again. The rhythm returns. A thoughtful observation in studies of daily life suggests that moments like these, small and repeated, form the foundation of routine, creating a sense of stability even in environments shaped by hard labor. You can feel that stability now in the way everything moves with quiet certainty. You let your gaze drift slightly, taking in the surrounding space once more. The tools remain at rest, the walls hold their warmth, the forge continues its slow, steady glow. Nothing competes for attention. Everything exists together. You lean back slightly, allowing your body to settle more fully into the bench. The warmth, the scent, the quiet sounds all combine into something that feels deeply familiar even if you have never been here before. It is a simple moment, but it carries weight. Not in a heavy way, but in a way that feels grounded, connected to something steady and enduring. The meal, the fire, the space itself all contribute to that feeling. You remain there watching the gentle movement of steam, listening to the quiet sounds of the workshop and feeling the warmth settle into you. Nothing needs to change. Nothing needs to be added. The night continues, and you are part of it. You remain seated, your attention drifting gently between the pot and the forge, until gradually the movement of light begins to draw your focus elsewhere. It is not the brightness itself, but how it changes the space around you, shaping the walls, the beams, and every surface into something softer and more fluid. The shadows begin to move, not quickly, not sharply, but in a slow, steady rhythm that follows the breathing of the fire. You lift your gaze toward the timber walls, watching as the glow stretches outward, then pulls back again. Each shift is subtle, yet it alters the entire room. The edges of objects blur slightly, then return, then blur again. Nothing disappears, but nothing remains entirely fixed. It feels almost like the workshop is shifting with the night. A well-known observation in studies of firelit environments is that flickering light creates a constant variation in perception, altering depth and shape in ways that can feel both calming and disorienting. In spaces like this, where fire is the only source of illumination, the effect becomes part of daily experience. You begin to understand that sensation now. The room feels familiar, yet slightly transformed. You lean forward a little, resting your elbows lightly on your knees, allowing your eyes to follow the movement more closely. A shadow stretches across the floor, long and uneven, then shortens again as the fire settles. It moves without sound, without resistance. It simply changes. A smaller detail sometimes noted in historical accounts is that People living in firelit spaces became highly attuned to these visual shifts, reading them almost instinctively as part of their environment. You can imagine that awareness developing here over many nights like this. You watch as the outline of a tool on the wall shifts slightly, its shape elongating then returning to its original form. The transformation is quiet, almost imperceptible unless you focus on it. Yet once you notice it, it becomes impossible to ignore. The workshop feels alive, not through motion, but through light. You sit back again, letting your gaze soften, allowing the shifting patterns to pass without needing to follow each one. The experience becomes less about observing and more about being present within it. The light no longer demands attention. It invites it. Outside, the cold continues to press gently against the walls, but here within the reach of the forge, the warmth holds steady. The contrast between inside and outside feels stronger now, emphasized by the glow that defines the interior space. You are aware of the boundary, but it feels distant. A faint creak draws your attention upward as one of the beams adjusts slightly, releasing the tension built from the changing temperature. The sound is soft, almost absorbed by the surrounding quiet, yet it adds another layer to the atmosphere. The space responds, in small, subtle ways. You shift your position slightly on the bench, and the movement changes how the light reaches you. One side of your body falls more deeply into shadow, while the other remains touched by warmth. The difference is noticeable yet gentle. You sit within both light and shadow. A thoughtful perspective in historical study suggests that environments shaped by firelight often influenced how people experience time, making it feel less segmented and more fluid. Without strong, consistent illumination, moments tend to blend together, guided more by sensation than by clear markers. You can feel that blending now. The edges of time soften. The present stretches. You glance again toward the pot near the coals, noticing how the rising steam catches the light differently with each movement. For a brief moment it becomes visible, a thin shifting line, then it disappears as it drifts upward into the darker air. It is fleeting, but steady. You listen closely and the soft crackle of the fire continues, joined now by the occasional faint tap from cooling materials somewhere in the room. These sounds do not interrupt the quiet. They define it. You draw a slow breath. The air moves one sit across your face, carrying with it the warmth of the forge and the faint dryness of ash. It feels balanced, neither too heavy nor too thin, shaped by the constant exchange between heat and cold. The shadows shift again. This time you do not follow them with your eyes. You simply notice. A less emphasized detail in discussions of medieval interiors is how much of daily life unfolded within these shifting patterns where light and shadow were not separate elements, but part of a continuous experience. The visual environment was never static, always responding to the smallest changes in the fire. You sit within that experience now, without needing to analyze it, without needing to define it. The workshop feels both stable and fluid at the same time, grounded in its structure, yet constantly changing in how it appears. The walls remain, the tools remain, the forge remains, yet the way you perceive them shifts from moment to moment. You lean back slightly, allowing your shoulders to relax and let your gaze settle somewhere in the middle distance where the light is softest and the shadows are least defined. It is an easy place to rest your eyes. Nothing stands out. Everything blends. The fire continues its slow rhythm. The shadows follow. And you find yourself settling more deeply into the quiet where movement exists without urgency and change happens without demand. It is enough to simply be here. You remain seated in that gentle balance of light and shadow until gradually your attention shifts again, this time toward a quieter kind of movement that begins to take shape within the workshop. It is not the forceful labor of the day, but something smaller, more deliberate, guided by habit rather than urgency. Work has not fully ended. It has simply softened. You notice a figure moving near the edge of the forge, adjusting a small object with careful hands. The motion is slow, almost unnoticeable at first, yet it carries a quiet intention. There is no rush, no pressure to complete anything quickly. The task unfolds at its own pace. A grounded observation in studies of craft life is that blacksmiths often reserved certain minor repairs or preparatory tasks for the evening, when the main workload had passed and attention could shift toward maintenance. These were not demanding jobs, but they were necessary in ensuring that tools and materials would be ready for the next day. You begin to see that pattern here. A piece of metal is lifted, briefly inspected in the softer light, then set down again. The movement is measured, guided more by familiarity than by active concentration. It feels almost instinctive, as if the hands already know what to do without needing to think. The sound is minimal, a faint touch of metal against wood, then stillness again. A lesser explored detail in historical discussion is how much of this kind of work relied on memory rather than written instruction. Skills were passed through repetition, through observation, through countless small actions performed over time. What you are witnessing now is part of that quiet continuity. You lean forward slightly, watching more closely. The figure reaches for a tool, not with hesitation, but with quiet certainty. There is no searching, no pause to consider. The tool is simply where it is expected to be, and the hand finds it without effort. The connection between person and space feels complete. You notice the rhythm, not in the sense of repeated strikes or loud movement, but in the pattern of action and pause. A small adjustment is made, followed by a moment of stillness. Then another adjustment, just as measured, just as calm. It feels almost like breathing. A subtle point sometimes raised by historians is that evening tasks often carried a different mental quality than daytime labour. Without the pressure of production, the work could become more reflective, more focused on care rather than output. You can sense that shift now in the slower pace and quieter presence. You draw a slow breath. The air feels steady, unchanged, yet the mood of the space has deepened. The earlier sense of transition has settled into something more stable, where activity and rest exist side by side without conflict. You sit back again, allowing your gaze to widen, taking in the full scene. The forge continues its low glow. The pot remains near the coals, its surface still moving gently. The tools rest where they were left, and within it all these small tasks continue, barely disturbing the quiet. A faint sound reaches you, a light scrape, then nothing. It is easy to miss, but it adds to the sense that the workshop is not idle. It is simply moving at a different pace, one that does not demand attention yet rewards it if given. You notice how the figure pauses, now holding the object in place as if considering its condition. The movement is still yet not empty. It feels like a moment of quiet evaluation shaped by experience rather than uncertainty. Then gently the object is set aside. Another is picked up. The process continues. An understated detail occasionally mentioned in accounts of traditional crafts is that repetition over time often led to a deep familiarity with materials, allowing artisans to sense subtle differences without needing obvious signs. You can imagine the awareness guiding these movements now, even in the dim light of evening. You shift slightly on the bench, the wood giving a soft response beneath you. The sound blends into the environment unnoticed by anything but you. It becomes part of the quiet pattern of the space. You let your hands rest loosely again. There is no need to move, no need to act. You're simply present. Outside the night remains distant, its presence felt only through the faint pressure of cold against the walls. Inside, the warmth continues to hold, shaped by the forge and sustained by its steady glow. The balance remains unchanged. A reflective interpretation in historical writing suggests that spaces like this often blurred the line between labour and rest, creating environments where even small actions carried meaning without urgency. You can feel that blending now in the way these tasks unfold without disrupting the calm. You watch as the figure completes one final adjustment, then allows their hands to rest. There is no clear ending, no defined moment of completion. The work simply tapers off, dissolving into stillness. The tools are set down, the movement fades, and once again the workshop returns to its quieter state where the presence of activity lingers without continuing. You draw another slow breath. The air feels the same. The warmth remains. The light continues its soft rhythm. Nothing has changed in a dramatic way, yet everything feels slightly more settled. You remain there, aware of how even the smallest actions shape the atmosphere, how even the quietest work contributes to the overall rhythm of the night. And as you sit within that rhythm, you begin to understand that in a place like this, rest is never separate from work. It grows out of it, gently, naturally, without needing to be announced. You remain in that softened stillness for a while, allowing the last traces of quiet work to settle fully into the background. Gradually something else begins to take its place. Not movement, not labour, but sound, low, steady and shaped by human presence rather than tools or fire. Voices begin to rise, not loudly, not sharply, but in a calm, measured way that fits easily into the rhythm of the workshop. You notice it first as a murmur, a gentle exchange that blends with the crackle of the coals. The words are not hurried. They unfold slowly, leaving space between each sentence, as if there is no need to fill the silence too quickly. You listen. The tone matters more than the content at first. It carries a quiet familiarity shaped by shared time and repeated evenings like this one. There is no urgency, no tension, just the steady presence of conversation that comes naturally when the day's work has ended. A widely recognised feature of medieval daily life is that storytelling and conversation often served as primary forms of evening activity, especially in environments where artificial lighting was limited. In spaces like this, people relied on spoken exchange to pass time, share knowledge, and maintain social bonds. You begin to feel that function here. The words move slowly, softly. They settle into the air without disturbing it. You shift slightly, turning your attention more fully toward the source of the voices. The firelight catches faint outlines of faces and hands, not clearly defined, but enough to suggest expression and movement. A hand lifts briefly, then lowers again. A head tilts in response to something said. The conversation flows, without structure, without effort. A less commonly highlighted aspect of historical life is how much of this communication relied on memory and oral tradition. Stories, experiences, and even practical knowledge were often passed down through repeated telling, shaped slightly each time, but grounded in shared understanding. You can sense that. One voice speaks. Another responds. There is a pause. Then, a quiet sound that might be laughter, though it is subdued, almost absorbed by the space before it fully forms. It does not break the calm, it becomes part of it. You lean back slightly, letting the sound reach you without needing to follow every word. The rhythm of speech becomes more important than its meaning. It rises and falls in a gentle cadence similar to the movement of the fire. You notice how it blends. The crackle of coals, the soft movement of air, the low tones of voices, all of it forming a single continuous presence. A thoughtful observation sometimes made in historical studies is that communal spaces like workshops often doubled as informal gathering places where people could exchange not just information, but a sense of connection. In colder seasons, the shared warmth made such interactions even more likely. You can imagine that clearly now. The workshop feels open, welcoming in a quiet way. You draw a slow breath and the scent of the space remains steady, though now it carries a faint trace of something human, the subtle presence of breath of warmth shared between people. It is not strong, not distinct, but it adds another layer to the environment. You listen again. The conversation shifts slightly. A different voice speaks, now slower, more measured, as if recalling something from memory. The tone carries a certain weight, though not in a heavy sense. It feels reflective, grounded in experience. There is a pause afterward, long enough to feel intentional. Then another voice responds softer, perhaps in agreement, perhaps adding something small to the story. The exchange continues, not building toward anything, not seeking conclusion. It simply moves. A small detail occasionally noted in discussions of medieval storytelling is that narratives were often shaped to suit the moment, adjusted for the listener's extended or shortened depending on time and need. What mattered was not precision but connection. You begin to understand that approach. The words here are not fixed. They adapt. They flow. You shift your hands slightly, feeling the warmth still present in the air, and notice how your body has settled more fully into the space. The earlier awareness of cold has faded, almost entirely replaced by a steady, even comfort. You sit within it, listening, Not actively, not with focus, but with a kind of open awareness that allows the sounds to pass through you without effort. The conversation becomes less distinct, more like a pattern than a series of individual words. You hear a soft change in tone, a brief rise, then a gentle fall, perhaps a question, perhaps an answer. It does not matter. The effect is the same. The space feels more alive, yet no less calm. A reflective perspective found in some historical interpretations suggests that these quiet exchanges played a significant role in maintaining a sense of continuity within daily life, especially in environments shaped by physical labour. They provided a different kind of rhythm, one not defined by work but by presence. You feel that rhythm now? It complements the fire. It complements the stillness. It does not replace them. You let your gaze soften again, no longer trying to locate the speakers, allowing the sound to exist without needing a source. It surrounds you in a gentle way, filling the space without overwhelming it. The workshop holds it easily. Nothing echoes sharply. Nothing feels out of place. You draw another slow breath. The air moves steadily. The warmth remains. The voices continue. And as you sit there, surrounded by the quiet exchange of words and the steady glow of the forge, you begin to sense how these moments, simple and unremarkable on their own form, the deeper structure of the night. They do not demand attention. They do not seek to impress. They simply exist, and that is enough. You remain where you are, letting the quiet conversation drift in and out of your awareness, until gradually your attention shifts again, this time towards something less visible but just as present. It begins with a small change in your breath, a subtle awareness of the air itself. The scent becomes clearer, not stronger, just more defined. You notice how each breath carries a layered mixture of smells that seem to belong entirely to this place. The warmth of charcoal sits at the centre, dry and slightly earthy, forming the foundation of everything else. Around it, the sharper edge of iron lingers, faint but unmistakable, like a quiet reminder of the day's labour. You inhale slowly. The air feels textured, not thick, not heavy, but filled with fine details that reveal themselves only when you pay attention. There is a faint trace of smoke, softened by time, woven into the wood, the walls, the tools, even the floor beneath your feet. It has settled into everything. A commonly noted feature of traditional blacksmith workshops is the persistent presence of these layered scents created by repeated heating, cooling, and exposure to fuel sources like charcoal. Over time, the environment absorbs these elements, creating a distinct atmosphere that remains even when no active work is taking place. You begin to sense that permanence now. This is not a temporary smell. It belongs here. You shift slightly on the bench and the movement stirs the air just enough to bring a different note forward, something faintly organic perhaps from the meal near the coals, or from the natural materials used throughout the space. It blends with the charcoal, softening its dryness. The balance is subtle, but noticeable. A quieter detail sometimes overlooked in historical accounts is how these environments could carry the scent of human presence as well, not in a strong or defined way, but as part of the overall atmosphere. The warmth of the breath, the repeated occupation of the space all contribute to this shared quality. You become aware of that now, not as a separate smell, but as a gentle layer within the whole. You draw another slow breath. The air moves easily. It warms as it passes near the forge, then cools slightly as it spreads outward, creating a soft gradient that shifts depending on where you sit. The movement is constant yet so gentle that it almost escapes notice. You feel it against your face. Light, steady. The conversation continues in the background, its tone unchanged, blending with the faint sounds of the fire. The combination of scent and sound creates a sense of depth, as if the space extends beyond what you can see. You are surrounded by it. A thoughtful observation in environmental history suggests that sensory experiences like smell often played a larger role in daily life than visual clarity, especially in low-light conditions. People relied on these subtle cues to understand their surroundings, to recognize familiarity, to feel grounded in a place. You begin to understand that reliance now. The scent anchors you. It tells you where you are. You glance toward the forge again, watching how the embers shift slightly, releasing a brief wave of warmth that carries with it a stronger hint of charcoal. It rises, then fades, blending back into the steady atmosphere. Nothing lingers too long. Everything moves gently. A small movement near the pot causes the steam to rise again, adding a faint moist note to the air. It softens the dryness, creating a brief contrast that passes almost as soon as it appears. You notice it, then it disappears. It feels balanced, complete. You rest your hands loosely again, feeling the warmth settle into your skin, and notice how the air changes slightly with each breath you take. It is not dramatic, not shifting in any sudden way, but it responds quietly, shaped by the presence of fire, food, and people. The space breathes with you. A lesser discussed idea in historical interpretation is that prolonged exposure to such environments could create a strong sense of familiarity where even small changes in scent would be immediately noticeable. For those who lived and worked here, this atmosphere would not feel unusual. It would feel like home. You let that thought settle. The workshop, with all its layers, its warmth, its quiet sounds and subtle smells, feels cohesive in a way that is difficult to define. Each element supports the others, creating a space that is both functional and deeply lived in. You remain still, listening, breathing, allowing the sensory details to pass through you without resistance. Outside, the night continues unseen but present. The cold remains beyond the walls, held at a distance by the steady influence of the forge. Inside, the warmth and scent create a different world, one that feels contained and self-sustaining. You draw another slow breath. The charcoal, the iron, the faint trace of food, the quiet presence of others, all of it blends into a single continuous experience. Nothing stands apart, nothing feels out of place. And as you sit within that atmosphere, you begin to understand how much of the night is shaped not by what you see, but by what you sense in quieter ways. The air itself tells the story, and you are part of it. You remain still for a while, letting the layered scents and soft voices settle into a quiet background presence, until gradually another awareness begins to form. It does not come from within the workshop this time, but from beyond it, from the darker world outside that continues to exist just out of sight. At first, it is only a faint sound, barely noticeable, a soft rustle carried by the cold air as it moves along the outer walls. You might have missed it before, hidden beneath the warmth and steadiness inside, but now it becomes clearer as your attention shifts. You listen more closely. The night has its own rhythm. A well-grounded insight from studies of rural medieval life is that nighttime soundscapes were shaped almost entirely by natural elements and animals rather than human activity. Once darkness settled, villages grew quiet, leaving the surrounding environment to fill the silence in subtle ways. You begin to notice those details now. A distant movement passes through the air, perhaps the light tread of an animal moving across frozen ground. It is not loud, not distinct enough to identify, but it carries a presence. Then it fades, leaving the quiet intact. You tilt your head slightly, listening. The wind returns for a moment, brushing along the wooden structure, finding its way through small openings, then slipping away again. It does not enter fully, but it makes itself known, a gentle reminder of the cold waiting just outside. The boundary feels thin, yet steady. A less frequently emphasized detail in historical discussions is that workshops like this, while enclosed, were rarely sealed completely. Small gaps in construction allowed air, sound, and even faint scents to pass through, connecting the interior to the outside world in subtle ways. You can sense that connection now. It is not intrusive. It is quiet. You remain seated, your body still warmed by the forge while your awareness reaches outward. The contrast becomes more noticeable, the steady warmth behind you, the imagined cold beyond the walls. You feel both at once. A faint sound rises again, this time a soft, uneven crunch, as if something moves across a surface touched by frost. It is distant, yet clear enough to hold your attention for a moment. Then it disappears, leaving only the steady quiet behind. You exhale slowly. The air within the workshop remains calm, unchanged, yet your perception of it has shifted. The outside world, though unseen, feels closer now, its presence carried through these small sounds. You glance briefly toward the doorway. Darkness fills the space beyond. No shapes, no movement, only depth. A thoughtful observation from environmental history suggests that in low-light conditions, Sound often becomes the primary way of understanding distance and space. Without clear vision, the mind relies on subtle cues to build a sense of the world beyond immediate reach. You begin to experience that now. Each sound suggests something: movement, distance, life continuing in the cold. You shift slightly, the bench responding with a soft creak beneath you. The sound feels louder for a moment, contrasting with the stillness that surrounds it, then it settles back into the background. Inside remains stable. The forge continues its low glow. The conversation, now quieter, drifts in soft fragments, and yet your attention keeps returning to the outside. A small, almost unnoticed detail sometimes mentioned in historical accounts is that winter nights often carried sound more clearly across open ground, especially when the air was still. This could make distant movements seem closer than they truly were. You consider that as another faint noise reaches you. A brief light call, not human, not close. It lingers for a moment, then fades into the wider silence. You do not need to identify it. Its presence is enough. You draw a slow breath, feeling the warmth fill your chest, and notice how it contrasts with the imagined cold just beyond the walls. The difference feels sharper, now more defined, yet still balanced. You're aware of your place, inside, held by the fire, separated from the night yet still connected to it. You let your gaze soften, again no longer focused on any single point, allowing the sounds to come and go without effort. They form a pattern not predictable but consistent in their quiet presence. The workshop listens with you. The wood, the walls, the beams all hold these sounds gently, never echoing them sharply, never amplifying them beyond what they are. Everything remains contained even as it remains open. A reflective perspective in historical interpretation suggests that such environments created a unique relationship between people and their surroundings, where the boundary between inside and outside was felt rather than seen. You begin to understand that feeling now. It is not a barrier, it is a transition. You sit within that transition, aware of the warmth, the quiet voices, the steady fire behind you, and the distant subtle life of the night beyond. Nothing interrupts, nothing demands. The sounds arrive, they pass, and in their place the calm remains. You breathe slowly. The workshop holds steady. The night continues, and you remain quietly aware of both. You remain aware of the faint sounds beyond the walls, letting them come and go without needing to follow them, until gradually your attention returns to the interior once more. The workshop draws you back in, not through movement or noise, but through a quieter kind of focus. The blacksmith is still there, not working in the forceful way you might expect, but present attentive, moving with a calm precision that feels almost effortless. You notice it in the smallest gestures, in how a piece of charcoal is shifted slightly, or how a tool is repositioned without hesitation. Nothing is wasted, not even motion. A well-established understanding among historians of craft is that blacksmithing relied heavily on the control of heat, often more than on physical strength alone. The ability to judge temperature by colour, to know exactly when metal was ready to be shaped, was considered one of the most important skills. You begin to see that skill in a quieter form now. Even in this low light, the blacksmith watches the forge closely, not staring, not focusing in an obvious way, but remaining aware of its condition at all times. A slight change in glow, a shift in the coals, these are enough to guide action. You lean forward slightly, observing. The blacksmith reaches for a small tool, something lighter than the heavy hammers used during the day. The movement is smooth, direct, guided by habit rather than thought. A minor adjustment is made to the bed of coals, barely disturbing the surface. The fire responds, a soft increase in brightness, then it settles again. A lesser discussed aspect of traditional craftsmanship is how much of this awareness operated below conscious thought. Years of repetition allowed artisans to respond to subtle changes without needing to analyze them directly. What you're seeing now is not effort. It is familiarity. You watch as the blacksmith pauses, hand resting lightly near the edge of the forge. There is no immediate task to complete, no pressing need to act. Yet the attention remains steady and calm, as if the fire itself is being listened to. The silence feels intentional, not empty. You draw a slow breath, noticing how your own body mirrors that stillness. The earlier sense of observation has softened into something quieter, something closer to shared presence. You are no longer just watching, you are part of the space. A commonly noted idea in historical study is that craftsmen often developed a close relationship with their materials and tools, treating them not as separate objects, but as extensions of their work and identity. You can sense that connection here, even in this moment of near stillness. The forge is not just a tool, it is a companion. You shift your gaze slightly, following the blacksmith's movements as they reach for the bellows. The handles are grasped gently, not with urgency, but with quiet intention. A slow push sends a measured flow of air into the coals. The fire brightens, only slightly, then returns to its steady state. A small, almost unnoticeable action, yet it changes everything. A quieter detail sometimes mentioned in historical accounts is that maintaining a fire overnight required careful balance. Not too much air, not too little. Too much could waste fuel. Too little could allow the fire to fade. The skill lay in knowing exactly how much was needed. You begin to understand that balance. Now, it is not exact, it is felt. You listen as the bellows settle back into place, the faint sound of leather and wood blending into the background. The workshop absorbs it easily, just as it does with every other small sound. Nothing stands out. Everything belongs. The blacksmith steps back slightly, observing the result of the adjustment. There is no visible reaction, no sign of approval or concern. Just a quiet acceptance of the fire as it is now. You notice how little is required. A single movement, a brief pause, then stillness again. A thoughtful perspective in craft history suggests that mastery often reveals itself in what is not done, in the restraint shown by those who understand their work deeply. You can see that restraint here in the absence of unnecessary action. You lean back slightly, letting your body relax once more and allow your gaze to soften. The blacksmith remains near the forge, present but inactive, aware without needing to move. The workshop feels settled again. The fire continues its slow rhythm. The air around warm. The outside world stays distant. You draw another slow breath. There is a sense of continuity here that feels unbroken, as if the moment you're in is simply one part of a much longer flow of time. The actions you have seen, small as they are, connect to everything that came before and everything that will follow. Nothing stands alone. Everything continues. You remain there quietly, aware of the subtle skill that shapes the space, the careful balance that keeps the fire alive, and the steady presence of someone who knows exactly how to maintain it without effort. And as you sit within that calm, you begin to understand that in a place like this, expertise is not loud or dramatic. It is quiet, steady, almost invisible, yet it defines everything around you. You remain settled in that quiet awareness, your attention no longer fixed on any single detail, but gently moving through the space as a whole. The fire glows steadily, the tools rest, the faint sounds from outside drift in and out, and the presence of the blacksmith lingers without demanding focus. Time feels softer now, less defined. You notice it not through change, but through the absence of it. Nothing pushes forward. Nothing marks a clear moment of passing. The night simply continues, stretching gently around you. You draw a slow breath. The air feels even, balanced. A well-grounded insight from historical studies of pre-industrial life suggests that without artificial lighting or mechanical clocks guiding every moment, people often experience time in a more fluid way, shaped by natural rhythms rather than precise measurement. You begin to feel that shift within yourself. There is no need to track minutes, no need to anticipate what comes next. You simply exist within the present. You let your gaze rest somewhere near the center of the room, where the light from the forge softens into a calm, even glow. The edges of objects blur slightly here, creating a space that feels easy on the eyes, neither too bright nor too dark. It is a place to pause. A quieter observation sometimes raised in historical interpretation is that moments of stillness were not always separate from daily life, but woven into it, especially during evening hours when physical work slowed and attention could turn inward. You sense that turning now. Your thoughts begin to drift, not in a restless way, but in a gentle, unfocused manner, as if they are following the same rhythm as the fire. One thought forms, then fades, replaced by another, then another, each one passing without needing to be held. You notice the sensation, then let it go. The conversation that once filled the space has softened, becoming little more than occasional murmurs, brief exchanges that rise and fall without forming a continuous thread. It feels less like speaking now and more like presence, shared, quiet. You shift slightly on the bench, adjusting your position, and feel the warmth settle more evenly across your body. The earlier awareness of cold has almost disappeared entirely, replaced by a steady comfort that requires no attention. You sit within it. A thoughtful perspective in historical writing suggests that environments like this, shaped by firelight and limited activity, often encouraged a kind of natural reflection where the mind could wander without interruption. You begin to understand that process now. There is nothing to focus on, nothing to solve, nothing to complete. Your awareness expands, then softens, then settles again, moving without direction, guided only by the quiet rhythm of the space. You listen. The fire continues its low crackle. A faint movement outside passes briefly, then fades. The structure of the workshop holds steady, with only the occasional soft creak reminding you of its presence. Everything remains unchanged. A less emphasized detail in discussions of daily life is how these extended periods of calm may have contributed to a different relationship with thought itself. One less structured, less driven by urgency, and more open to quiet observation. You feel that openness now. Your breathing slows slightly. Your body relaxes more deeply. Your thoughts become lighter. You let your gaze drift again, no longer focusing on the forge or the tools or the walls, but allowing everything to exist together in a single soft field of awareness. Nothing stands apart. Everything blends. You rest your hands loosely, feeling the faint warmth still present in the air, and notice how even the smallest movements feel slower, more deliberate, as if the pace of the night has settled into you. You do not resist it. You follow it. A reflective interpretation in historical study suggests that such moments, though often unrecorded, may have formed an essential part of daily life, offering a quiet balance to the physical demands of work. You can sense that balance now. The day has passed. The effort is done. What remains is this: stillness, presence, continuity. You draw another slow breath. The air moves gently unchanged, carrying with it the same familiar sense, the same quiet warmth. There is no variation that demands attention, no shift that calls you away from the calm you have settled into. You remain here, aware, yet relaxed. The fire continues its steady glow, no longer something you watch, but something you exist alongside. The space around you holds its quiet form unchanged, yet always subtly alive. You notice how little is required for this moment to feel complete. No action, no decision, no effort, only presence. And as you sit within that presence, you begin to understand that the night is not something that happens around you. It is something you become part of, gently, without resistance, without need. You remain in that softened awareness for a while, letting the stillness carry you, until gradually a small shift begins to form at the edge of the moment. It is not sudden, not disruptive, but distinct enough to draw your attention back outward. A sound approaches, faint at first, then clearer, a light knock against wood. You lift your gaze toward the doorway where darkness still fills the space beyond, and for a moment nothing changes. Then the door moves slightly, opening just enough to allow a narrow line of colder air to slip inside. The temperature shifts, only slightly, but you feel it. A grounded observation in historical records suggests that blacksmiths often remained accessible to their communities even after the main hours of work had ended, especially in smaller settlements where urgent needs could arise without warning. Tools might break, hinges might fail, and the blacksmith skill could be required at any hour. You begin to see that possibility unfold. The door opens a little where a figure steps in, wrapped against the cold, carrying with them the scent of the outside. It is sharp, clean, almost empty compared to the layered warmth of the workshop. For a brief moment the two environments meet. Then the door closes again. The warmth returns. The boundary restores itself. You notice how the figure pauses just inside, allowing their eyes to adjust to the low light. The glow of the forge outlines their shape, soft and indistinct, yet enough to suggest purpose in their presence. They do not speak immediately. Instead, they stand quietly as if waiting for the right moment to enter the flow of the space. A lesser emphasized detail in accounts of medieval life is how much communication relied on shared understanding rather than immediate speech. Presence alone could carry meaning, especially in familiar environments where roles and expectations were already known. You can sense that quiet understanding here. The blacksmith turns slightly, acknowledging the arrival without urgency. There is no surprise, no disruption, just a calm awareness that someone has entered and that something may be needed. The moment holds, then a few quiet words are exchanged. You cannot make out the details, but the tone is clear, measured, respectful, practical, the kind of conversation shaped by a necessity rather than excess. You listen without focusing. The rhythm of speech remains soft. A small object is revealed, perhaps held out briefly, catching a faint glimmer of light before returning to shadow. The gesture is simple, yet it carries intention. Something requires attention, something small but important enough to bring someone out into the winter night. A thoughtful note in historical interpretation suggests that craftsmen often played a central role in maintaining the daily function of a community, addressing needs that could not wait until morning. Even minor repairs could hold significance, especially in environments where resources were limited. You begin to understand that role now. The blacksmith steps forward slightly, taking the object, examining it with a quiet focus. There is no rush, no sign of inconvenience. The task is accepted as part of the rhythm of life. You watch as the figure who entered moves closer to the warmth of the forge, their posture relaxing slightly as the heat reaches them. The cold they carried in begins to fade, replaced by the steady comfort of the workshop. The contrast is clear. Outside remains distant. Inside holds steady. A subtle observation sometimes noted in historical accounts is how these brief interactions, though practical in nature, also reinforce social bonds within small communities. Even a simple visit could carry a sense of connection, a quiet acknowledgement of shared reliance. You can feel that connection here. The voices continue softly. The object is turned, inspected, considered. There is a pause, then a small nod. The understanding passes between them without needing elaboration. You shift slightly on the bench, your movement barely noticeable, and feel the warmth settle around you once more. The earlier calm remains, though now it includes this new layer of interaction, this brief interruption that does not disturb the balance. It becomes part of it. The blacksmith moves toward the forge, positioning the object near the coals, not fully committing to work, but preparing for it. The action is measured, deliberate, shaped by experience rather than urgency. The fire responds softly. You draw a slow breath. The air carries a faint trace of the outside, still lingering, though it begins to blend quickly into the existing atmosphere. The sharpness fades, replaced once again by the familiar layers of charcoal, iron, and warmth. The transition completes itself. A reflective perspective in historical study suggests that life in such environments often unfolded through these small, continuous exchanges where work, rest, and social interaction were not separate phases, but overlapping aspects of the same rhythm. You can see that clearly now. The visitor does not disrupt the night. They become part of it. You let your gaze soften again, allowing the scene to settle into your awareness without needing to follow each detail. The voice is quiet, the movement slow, and the workshop returns to its steady presence, now slightly enriched by what has just passed. The door remains closed. The warmth holds. The fire continues its gentle glow, and you remain seated, quietly aware of how even the smallest arrival can shift the atmosphere without breaking it. Everything adjusts, then settles, as it always does. You remain seated as the visitor's presence settles into the background, and gradually your attention returns to the forge itself. The earlier glow has softened further, no longer pulsing with quiet strength, but easing into something calmer and more contained. The fire lowers, not disappearing, just settling deeper into itself. You notice how the brighter edges fade, leaving behind a core of embers that glow steadily without rising into flame. The light they cast is dimmer now, softer, reaching only partway across the room before dissolving into shadow. The workshop changes with it. A grounded observation in studies of traditional forges is that maintaining embers overnight was often more important than sustaining visible flame, since these coals could be revived quickly in the morning with the right balance of air and fuel. You begin to see that intention here. The fire is not meant to shine, it is meant to endure. You lean forward slightly, watching as a small section of charcoal shifts inward, settling into a more compact form. The glow brightens briefly, then stabilizes as if adjusting to its new arrangement. The movement is minimal, yet complete. A less frequently emphasized detail in historical accounts is that embers often provided a more consistent source of heat than open flames, making them ideal for slow, sustained warmth during long winter nights. You feel that steady warmth now. It reaches you more gently than before, no longer pressing outward but resting in place, offering a quiet comfort that requires no attention. You draw at a slow breath. The air feels softer. The sharpness of earlier heat has faded, replaced by a more even, balanced warmth that blends easily with the cooler edges of the room. The contrast lessens. Everything begins to merge. You glance toward the walls, noticing how the shadows have deepened. Without the stronger light of flame, they no longer shift as dramatically. Instead, they hold their shape still and quiet, as if the entire space has settled into a deeper layer of calm. The movement of light slows, then nearly stops. A thoughtful interpretation found in environmental history suggests that as light diminishes, perception often turns inward, with fewer visual changes drawing attention outward. You begin to experience that shift. Your gaze softens, your focus loosens, the need to observe fades. You sit back again, allowing your body to settle more fully into the bench, and notice how the warmth now feels more distant yet more stable. It does not fluctuate, it simply remains. The air carries a faint glow, not visible, but present. A small sound reaches you as another piece of charcoal settles, producing a soft, muted crack. It echoes briefly, then disappears into the quiet. Nothing follows. The stillness returns immediately. A subtle observation sometimes mentioned in discussions of nighttime environments is that reduced light often brings a heightened awareness of small sounds, as the absence of visual stimulation allows other senses to become more prominent. You notice that now. Each sound stands alone, then fades. You glance toward the visitor and the blacksmith, their forms now less distinct in the dim light. Their movements, if any, are slow and minimal, blending into the quiet atmosphere without drawing focus. The interaction has softened, almost complete. You draw another slow breath, feeling the air move gently, unchanged in its rhythm, yet altered in its quality. The earlier layers of scent remain, though they seem quieter, now less defined, as if the cooling fire has softened their presence. The workshop feels deeper, more enclosed. A reflective perspective in historical study suggests that the gradual dimming of light often marked a natural transition toward rest, guiding both body and mind into a slower state without the need for deliberate action. You can feel that guidance now. There is no clear moment of change, only a gradual easing. You let your gaze rest near the embers, watching their steady glow without focusing too closely. The light is enough to hold your attention, yet not strong enough to demand it. It invites stillness. You remain there, aware of the gentle warmth, the quiet air, and the steady presence of the embers that continue their slow, patient work. Nothing rushes, nothing demands. The fire has not ended, it has simply changed. And within that change, the entire workshop settles into a deeper calm where movement is minimal, light is soft, and the night continues without interruption. You breathe slowly. The embers glow, and everything feels held within that quiet, steady warmth. You remain near the gentle glow of the embers, your eyes adjusted to the dimmer light, when a subtle change begins to make itself known. It does not come from within the forge this time, but from the edges of the room, where the warmth fades and the presence of the outside world quietly returns. The cold begins to creep inward, not sharply, not all at once, but in a gradual, steady way that feels almost patient. You notice it first against your hands, where the warmth no longer reaches as fully as before. The air feels slightly cooler there, brushing against your skin with a faint, dry touch. It is not uncomfortable, but it is enough to draw your attention. You shift slightly, feeling the difference. A well-documented aspect of winter life in medieval structure is that insulation was often limited, allowing external temperatures to influence indoor spaces once the primary heat source diminished. Even with a maintained fire, the cold could gradually return as the night deepened. You begin to experience that shift now. The workshop is still warm, but less so. You draw a slow breath, noticing how the air feels thinner, less saturated with heat. The earlier balance begins to change with the cooler edges extending further into the space. The warmth retreats. Gently, you pull your hands closer together, holding them near your body, and feel the residual heat still present, though softer now. It lingers rather than radiates, offering comfort without fully resisting the cold that begins to press inward. The contrast grows. A quieter observation sometimes mentioned and in historical accounts is that people living in such environments often adapted to these subtle fluctuations, adjusting their position within a room rather than attempting to change the entire space. You can see that adjustment here. The blacksmith and the visitor remain closer to the forge, their positions naturally drawn toward the remaining heat. There is no discussion, no deliberate movement to reorganize the space. It happens quietly, almost instinctively. You shift slightly on the bench, leaning a little closer to the center, and notice how the warmth increases again, even if only by a small degree. It is enough. The embers continue to glow, their light steady but subdued, offering both warmth and a visual anchor in the dim room. Around them the shadows remain deep and still, no longer shifting, no longer alive with movement. The space feels quieter now, more settled. A subtle detail occasionally noted in environmental history is that winter air, especially at night, often carries a distinct dryness which can become more noticeable as interior warmth decreases. You sense that dryness now. It brushes lightly against your throat as you breathe, not harsh, but present enough to shape the feeling of the air itself. You swallow gently, evenly. The sensation fades. Outside, the night continues, though its presence is now felt more strongly, through the slow return of cold rather than through sound. The earlier noises have diminished, leaving behind a deeper stillness that feels more complete. You listen. There is almost nothing. A faint movement passes, once distant and brief, then disappears entirely. The silence settles. A thoughtful interpretation in historical study suggests that winter nights often carried a unique stillness shaped by both environmental conditions and the reduced activity of people and animals alike. You begin to feel that stillness now. It surrounds the workshop. It presses gently against it. You draw another slow breath, noticing how the air within the space remains distinct, shaped by the lingering warmth of the forge, yet no longer fully separate from the cold outside. The boundary softens. You sit quietly, aware of how your body responds to the change. Your posture adjusts slightly. Your movements become smaller. Your awareness turns inward once more. There is no urgency, only adaptation. A less commonly discussed detail in historical life is how much comfort depended on proximity rather than control, especially in environments where resources were limited. Warmth was not evenly distributed. It was found, held, and shared. You can feel that reality now. The closer you remain to the forge, the more the warmth holds. The further you drift, the more the cold returns. You choose your place without thinking. You remain where the balance feels right. The embers glow steadily, their presence unchanged even as the air around them cools. They continue their quiet work, holding heat within their core, offering what they can without resistance. You watch them for a moment. Their light feels softer now, more distant, yet still present. You let your gaze relax again, no longer focusing on any single point, allowing the space to exist as it is, with its gentle contrast of warmth and cold light and shadow presence and quiet. Nothing needs to be altered. Nothing needs to be resisted. The night deepens. The cold presses inward. The warmth remains where it can, and you sit within that balance, aware of how the environment shifts without breaking, how comfort adjusts rather than disappears. You breathe slowly. The air moves. The embers glow. And the workshop holds its quiet form even as the winter night continues to settle around it. You remain close to the quiet warmth, your body naturally leaning toward the embers, until gradually another shift begins to take shape. It is not in the fire, not in the air, but in the way the space is used. The night has settled deeply now, and something within the workshop begins to change with it. It is time to rest, not announced, not spoken, but understood. You notice it first in the slowing of movement. The visitor who had remained near the forge now steps back slightly, their posture easing as if the need for attention has passed. The blacksmith too no longer watches the fire with the same quiet vigilance. The awareness remains, but it has softened. The space begins to quiet further. A well-supported insight from historical research is that in many medieval workshops, especially those tied closely to the home sleeping within the workspace, was not unusual. The proximity to heat made it one of the most practical places to rest during colder seasons. You begin to see that transition now. A small area near the forge is cleared without effort. Objects are moved just enough to create space not arranged with precision, but with familiarity. It is a practiced motion repeated many times before requiring little thought. You watch as a simple layer is prepared on the ground. Not elaborate, just enough. A quieter note in historical interpretation suggests that comfort was often defined by necessity rather than luxury, with bedding consisting of basic materials such as straw cloth or worn fabric. These layers provided insulation and a sense of separation from the cold ground. You can imagine that clearly here. The surface is firm, the covering is thin, yet it serves its purpose. You shift slightly on the bench, observing as the space takes on a new function. What was once a place of work becomes a place of rest without any clear boundary marking the change. It happens naturally. You draw a slow breath. The air feels cooler now, though the warmth near the embers still holds steady. The difference between positions within the room becomes more noticeable, guiding where each person settles. Closer to the fire, where the heat remains, a subtle detail sometimes mentioned in accounts of pre-modern living is how sleeping arrangements were often shaped by heat distribution rather than personal preference. Those closest to the fire experienced more comfort, while those further away adapted to the colder edges. You begin to understand that arrangement now. The positioning is not random. It follows the warmth. You watch as the blacksmith lowers themselves slowly, lay their movements steady and unhurried. There is no ceremony, no formal preparation. The act of lying down feels as natural as any other part of the day. The body adjusts. The space accepts it. The visitor follows, settling nearby, maintaining a quiet distance that feels respectful yet practical. No words are needed to guide this placement. It is understood through familiarity. You remain seated for a moment longer, observing. Then you shift your position slightly, adjusting your own posture, feeling the firmness of the bench beneath you. The idea of rest begins to settle into your awareness as well, not as a decision, but as a gradual inclination. A reflective observation from historical studies suggests that transitions into rest were often less defined in earlier periods, shaped more by physical fatigue and environmental cues than by fixed schedules. You can feel that gradual transition now. Your body responds without needing instruction. Your movements slow, your breathing deepens. You lean back slightly, allowing your shoulders to relax, and notice how the dim light from the embers creates a soft, stable environment free from sharp contrasts or sudden changes. It encourages stillness. A lesser-known detail in historical living conditions is that shared sleeping spaces often required a level of quiet awareness where movements were minimized and sound was kept low to maintain a sense of collective rest. You begin to sense that awareness here. The workshop grows quieter still. Even the smallest movements feel softened. You draw another slow breath, noticing how the air now carries a calmer presence shaped by a reduced activity and the steady decline of heat. The earlier layers of scent remain, though they feel more distant, less defined. Everything begins to settle. You glance toward the embers once more, their glow steady and low, offering just enough light to outline the shapes within the room. They no longer illuminate the space fully, but they provide a quiet sense of presence. Enough to remain aware, not enough to distract. You let your gaze soften again, no longer focusing on any particular object, allowing the space to exist as a whole. The workshop, once active and filled with motion, now feels calm and contained, shaped by rest rather than work. Nothing needs to be done. Nothing needs to change. The night continues. The bodies within the space begin to settle, and you remain there quietly aware of how the workshop transforms once more, becoming a place not of labour, but of quiet shared rest. You remain where you are, watching the slow transition into rest settle across the workshop until gradually your own body begins to follow the same quiet pattern. The bench beneath you feels steady, familiar, and your posture softens without effort. You ease yourself down, carefully. The surface is firm, yet it holds enough warmth to make the movement comfortable. You adjust slightly, finding a position that feels balanced, neither too close to the embers nor too far from their fading heat. The air around you feels still shaped by the quiet presence of those already at rest. You close your eyes for a moment, then open them again. The glow of the embers remains soft and low, just enough to outline the space without defining it. Shapes blur gently at the edges, and the details that once held your attention begin to fade into something less distinct. You settle further. A widely accepted understanding in the study of pre-modern sleep patterns is that rest often occurred in phases, with people drifting in and out of light sleep, rather than entering a single uninterrupted state. The environment itself, shaped by sound and temperature, played a role in guiding that rhythm. You begin to sense that rhythm now. Not imposed, but emerging naturally. Your breathing slows. Your body grows heavier against the surface beneath you. The warmth from the embers reaches you in soft waves, not strong, but steady enough to maintain a quiet comfort. It lingers along your side, fading gradually as it moves outward, leaving the rest of the air cooler but not cold. The balance holds. A quieter note found in some historical interpretations suggests that sleeping near a forge carried both comfort and subtle risk, as the presence of heat and smoke required awareness even during rest. You can imagine that awareness here not as tension, but as a quiet readiness beneath the surface of sleep. You listen. The sounds of the workshop have softened almost completely. A faint crackle from the embers, a subtle shift from someone nearby, then stillness again. Each sound stands alone, separated by long stretches of quiet, allowing your mind to drift between them without effort. You close your eyes once more. This time you let them remain closed. The darkness feels gentle, not empty, a soft, continuous presence that replaces the dim light of the room without changing the sense of space. You notice how your thoughts begin to change. They lose their structure. They move more freely. One thought fades before it fully forms, replaced by another that dissolves just as quickly. There is no need to hold on to them, no need to follow them to completion. They come, they pass. A lesser discussed detail in studies of sleep is how environments with minimal stimulation can encourage this kind of drifting awareness, where the boundary between waking and dreaming becomes less defined. You begin to approach that boundary now. Your body remains still. Your breathing's steady. Your awareness soft. A faint warmth brushes against your hand as you shift slightly, adjusting your position without fully waking. The movement is small, almost automatic, guided by comfort rather than intention. Then stillness returns. You hear a quiet movement nearby, a breath. Slow, even. Someone else has settled into sleep. The sound blends into the background, becoming part of the steady rhythm that surrounds you. It does not draw your attention away. It supports it. You drift further. A reflective observation sometimes made in historical contexts is that shared sleeping spaces often created a collective sense of rest, where the presence of others contributed to a feeling of security and continuity. You can feel that now. You are not alone. Yet there is no disturbance, only presence. Your body relaxes more deeply. The weight of the day, though, not your own, seems to echo through the space, settling into the floor, the walls, the air itself. Everything feels grounded, held in place by the quiet of the night. You breathe slowly. The air moves gently across your face, cooler now, but still carrying the faint warmth of the embers. It feels balanced, neither pulling you fully awake nor allowing you to drift too far. It holds you there. Between, a subtle sound reaches you. The embers shift, a small thrash. Crack, then silence again. It fades quickly, leaving no trace beyond the brief awareness it created. You remain still. Your thoughts continue to loosen. Your awareness narrows, then widens, then softens again. There is no clear direction. No need for one. The workshop exists around you, steady and quiet, its presence unchanged, even as your connection to it becomes less defined. The shapes, the sounds, the warmth all remain, but they begin to feel distant, as if you are no longer fully within them. You drift, gently, without effort, and as the night deepens and the embers continue their quiet glow, you find yourself resting in that soft space between waking and sleep, where everything slows, everything softens, and nothing asks anything more of you. You drift within that soft space for a while, neither fully asleep nor fully aware, until a small change begins to form somewhere nearby. It does not break the quiet, it simply enters it gently, almost respectfully. A movement, slow, measured. Your awareness rises slightly, not fully returning, but enough to notice that someone has shifted from their place. The sound is faint, a careful adjustment against the ground, followed by a pause that allows the stillness to settle again. Then another movement. You do not open your eyes, you listen instead. A broadly supported observation in studies of early sleep patterns suggests that waking during the night was not unusual in pre-industrial settings, especially in environments shaped by firelight and shared space. People often stirred briefly, attending to small tasks before returning to rest. You begin to understand that pattern now. The movement continues. Quiet steps across the floor, soft enough to avoid disturbance. You sense the direction without seeing it. Toward the forge, toward the embers that have held their steady glow through the passing hours. The warmth has diminished slightly, though it still lingers at the center of the room. You hear a faint shift, the sound of charcoal being moved. Then stillness. A quieter detail occasionally noted in historical accounts is that maintaining a fire overnight often required periodic attention, even if only minimal, to ensure that it would remain alive until morning. You imagine that care now. A hand reaches toward the coals. You can almost feel the motion through the air, the gentle displacement, the quiet intention behind it. There is no urgency, only a calm awareness of what is needed. A soft breath follows. Then the faintest movement of the bellows. Not strong, just enough. The embers respond. You sense it without seeing. A subtle increase in warmth, a slight shift in the air. A reflective observation in craft history suggests that such actions were often performed with a kind of practiced quiet, where the goal was not to wake others but to maintain continuity without interruption. You remain still, listening. The rhythm continues. A small adjustment. A pause, another. The fire settles into a slightly brighter state, not enough to fill the room with light, but enough to strengthen its presence. The warmth spreads outward again, reaching you in a gentle wave that feels both familiar and new. You notice it, then let it pass. A faint sound reaches you as the bellows return to rest, the leather and wood shifting softly into place. The movement ends as quietly as it began, leaving no disruption behind. Only continuity. A less frequently highlighted idea in historical interpretation is that these small acts of maintenance, though easily overlooked, were essential to the daily rhythm of life, ensuring that the transition from night to morning could happen without delay. You begin to sense that connection now. This moment is not separate. It leads forward. You hear the steps again, returning, slow, careful. The figure settles back into place, the ground receiving the weight with a soft, muted sound. Then stillness resumes as if nothing had happened at all. The workshop returns to its quiet state, unchanged, yet subtly renewed. You remain where you are, your body still, your breathing steady, your awareness hovering at the edge of sleep. The warmth now feels slightly stronger though, still gentle, holding the space in a balanced calm. You do not need to open your eyes. You already know. The fire continues. The night holds. A thoughtful perspective in environmental history suggests that such subtle shifts into temperature and light often guided the body's natural rhythms, influencing how deeply one slept and when one stirred. You feel that guidance now. Your awareness softens again. The brief rise fades. You drift back. The sounds recede. The warmth steadies. Your thoughts loosen once more, slipping into that quiet, unstructured space where time no longer feels measured. The moment you noticed passes into memory, then into nothing at all. You breathe slowly. The air remains calm. The workshop surrounds you, unchanged in its structure, yet gently altered by the care that has just been given to the fire. Everything continues, without effort, without interruption, And as you settle once more into the soft rhythm of the night, you begin to understand how even in sleep the life of the workshop carries on quietly sustained by small unseen actions. The embers glow, the warmth holds, and you drift deeper into rest held gently between awareness and sleep. You drift in that quiet, weightless state for some time until a subtle shift begins to form again. It is softer than before, almost imperceptible, yet it carries a different quality. Not the careful movement of someone tending the fire, not the distant sounds of the night, but something gentler. The first hint of morning. It does not arrive all at once. It reveals itself slowly. You remain still, your eyes closed, yet something changes in the space around you. The darkness feels less complete, less absolute, as if it has begun to thin without fully lifting. You notice it through your awareness, not your sight. A grounded insight from studies of pre-modern life is that people often woke in response to natural light rather than fixed timekeeping, especially in winter when daylight arrived gradually and quietly. You begin to sense that gradual change now. The embers still glow, the warmth remains, but the atmosphere shifts. A faint difference in the air, a subtle lightness. You draw a slow breath and the air feels cooler yet clearer, as if it carries something new from outside. The night has not ended, but it has begun to release its hold. You open your eyes slightly. The room is still dim, yet not as dark as before. The shapes around you begin to return not sharply but in soft outlines. The beams above the walls, the edge of the bench, all begin to emerge from the shadows, guided by a faint natural light filtering in from beyond. It is quiet, almost completely still. A less emphasized detail in environmental history is that dawn often brought a distinct stillness before the activity of the day began, a brief period where the world seemed to pause between night and morning. You feel that pause now. It holds the space. You remain lying still, your body relaxed, your breathing steady, allowing the moment to unfold without interruption. The others nearby have not yet stirred, their presence felt through the quiet rhythm of breath, slow and even. The workshop rests between. A thoughtful perspective found in historical interpretation suggests that this early transition from darkness to light often carried a sense of quiet anticipation, though not always consciously recognized. You begin to feel that anticipation now, not as excitement, but as a gentle shift forward. You listen. The sounds of the night have faded almost entirely. In their place, a new kind of quiet settles, one that feels less deep, less enclosed. It carries a subtle openness, as if the space itself has begun to expand. A faint sound reaches you, distant, light, perhaps the first movement of something outside, then silence again. You do not need to identify it. Its presence is enough. You draw another slow breath, noticing how the air now carries a different quality. It feels fresher, though still touched by the lingering warmth of the embers. The layered scents remain, but they seem lighter, less dense. The transition continues. A rarely discussed detail in historical living conditions is how closely daily routines were tied to these subtle environmental changes, with even small shifts in light or air, signaling the approach of activity. You begin to understand that connection now. The moment is not fixed. It is moving. You shift slightly, adjusting your position, and feel the ground beneath you once more firm and steady. The warmth has softened, though it still offers comfort, especially near the center of the room. The embers glow quietly, no longer the focus, but still present. You let your gaze drift upward, noticing how the faint light from outside now outlines the upper edges of the space. The darkness recedes gently, not pushed away but eased aside. Everything becomes clearer, slowly. A reflective interpretation in environmental study suggests that dawn often unfolds as a process rather than an event revealing the world layer by layer. You can see that unfolding now. You remain still, allowing the change to continue without rushing it. There is no need to rise, no need to act. The workshop has not yet awakened, and the calm of the night still lingers. You exist within that overlap. The last moments of rest, the first moments of morning. You breathe steadily. The air moves. The light grows almost imperceptibly, and within that quiet transition you begin to sense that the stillness will soon give way to movement, that the calm will shift into activity, and that the cycle of the workshop will begin again. But for now, nothing changes fully. Everything remains suspended, balanced, held in the gentle space between night and day. You remain within that gentle threshold where night is not fully gone and morning has not fully arrived, allowing the quiet to stretch a little longer. The faint light continues to grow almost unnoticed, shaping the room in soft layers that return slowly to clarity. You open your eyes more fully. The workshop begins to reveal itself again. The beams above are easier to see now, their dark surfaces outlined by a thin wash of early light. The walls regain their form, the rough texture of wood becoming visible once more. The floor beneath you appears steady and familiar, its uneven surface no longer hidden in shadow. Everything returns. Gradually, a widely supported observation in historical life is that the beginning of the day often emerged through small, natural cues rather than sudden action, especially in spaces where work and living overlapped. The transition from rest to activity followed the rhythm of light and temperature more than any fixed signal. You begin to feel that rhythm now. It moves through the space, through you, as to soft movement nearby draws your attention as someone shifts from their resting place. The sound is quiet, unhurried, a natural response to the changing light. There is no abrupt waking, no sudden motion, only a gradual return to awareness. You listen, another movement follows, then stillness again. The workshop is not yet active, but it is no longer at rest. You sit up slowly, feeling the firmness of the ground beneath you, the faint warmth still lingering from the embers. The air feels cooler than before, yet clearer, carrying a subtle freshness from outside that was not present during the night. You draw a slow breath. It feels new. A lesser discussed detail in studies of early daily routines is that morning tasks often began with tending the fire, restoring it from embers to flame before any other work could continue. You glance toward the forge. The embers remain quiet, waiting. A figure moves toward them, the motion calm and familiar, guided by the same practiced awareness you noticed before. There is no hesitation, no need to assess. The action is known. A small piece of fuel is placed carefully. The bellows are lifted. A measured push of air follows. The embers respond, slowly at first, then more clearly. A soft glow begins to brighten, spreading outward through the bed of coals. The change is gentle yet unmistakable. The fire begins to return. You watch without focusing too closely. The light grows as the warmth follows. A subtle insight sometimes mentioned in historical writing is that the first moments of rekindling a fire often carried a quiet sense of renewal, marking the continuation of daily life rather than a fresh beginning. You begin to understand that feeling now. This is not a start. It is a continuation. The visitor who had rested nearby begins to stir as well, adjusting their position and rising slowly. There is no urgency, no rush to leave. The workshop provides a brief moment of shared space before the day takes shape. You notice how the room feels different already. The shadows retreat, the edges sharpen. The quiet remains, but it feels lighter now, less deep, as if it is preparing to give way to sound and movement. You shift your position again, bring your hands closer to the growing warmth and feel the difference almost immediately. The heat returns more actively, reaching outward, reclaiming the space it had softened during the night. The balance changes. A reflective perspective in environmental history suggests that morning often transforms a space, not through sudden action, but through the steady return of light, warmth, and intention. You can feel that transformation now. The workshop awakens, not fully, but clearly. You remain there for a moment longer, watching as the fire strengthens, as the fears within the space begin to move with quiet purpose, and as the environment shifts from rest to readiness. The night has passed, without disruption, without haste. It has simply unfolded. You draw a final, slow breath, letting the calm of the workshop settle deeply within you, even as the day begins to form around it. The warmth, the quiet, the steady rhythm of the space all remain carried forward into what comes next. And now, as the light continues to grow and the fire returns to life, you allow yourself to drift away from the scene, holding only the soft impression of warmth, quiet, and continuity. The memory of the night remains gentle, fading, yet present. You rest within that feeling, letting it soften further, allowing the edges of the workshop to blur once more in your mind, as if the space itself is slowly dissolving into calm. The sounds quiet. The light fades in your awareness. The warmth lingers just a little longer. Then gently it too softens. You breathe slowly, evenly, and allow everything to settle. The fire, the room, the quiet presence of those within it. All of it becoming distant, all of it becoming still, until there is only a soft, steady calm carrying you forward into rest. Sleep well.